increasing your awareness of audience, who the article is written for, will hopefully impact your own writing for your field. So if you know who you're writing for, then you'll have an understanding of what information you need to include in your writing, in your articles. So hopefully that later on in this class, you can use this information for your writing portfolios, because my understanding is that you'll need to actually analyze some of your own writing. So hopefully it will be useful for that. And then additionally, it can be useful later on when you're actually working in your fields and writing wonderful published articles. Okay? So we're going to look at how do you analyze a scholarly paper in terms of audience. So we're going to use a scholarly article from your field, and you're actually going to make notes directly on the article or on this handout that I'll give you. And then at the conclusion of the activity, I want you to consider how the observations that you've made here can inform your own writing. Will you take any of the ideas or examples that you find, will you take them into your own writing and use them? Hopefully you will. And you can send just a brief, very informal email to Sharon, just talking about maybe one interesting thing that you found during this task. And I'll explain this again in a few minutes. But before we start, I wanted to look at an article from my field. So this activity asks you to identify audience, various definitions and definition structures, hedging that you have been working on, mid-position adverbs and transition words, or perhaps adverbs that are not mid-position but could be, and then to look at verb tense, like in the activity, the flow activity where you had to look at present perfect. It's going to ask you to do some of that, and then also look at if verbs are in the passive voice or active voice, and to ask yourself why. Why did the author choose active voice versus passive voice? So if we look at audience and we want to know who the article is written for, one of the first things that I do when I'm reading an article from my field is I read the introduction, right? It's a good place to start. It's where the author is giving you the general information. And one of the things that I noticed is that right away there are nouns, noun phrases, key terms being introduced right away. So university policies, textual plagiarism, international ESL graduate students, academic writing. And then I have sort of location nouns or noun phrases across the English-speaking world in North America. And then more specifically, I see Canadian. So this is telling me information that probably this is going to be about plagiarism, right, in university writing. And it's going to be in the English-speaking world, probably in the northern part of North America, Canada. So that's already telling me some information about who the author believes is going to read this. So then if I ask myself these questions, for what audience was this article written? Well, I think it was written for academics, right? People in the university world, probably teachers, and then more specifically, probably ESL writing teachers, because it's dealing with plagiarism in academic writing. I also think it could be intended for policymakers, because it's talking about university policies. Well, so then I ask myself, what assumptions do I think the author made about the audience's knowledge of this topic? Well, from the introduction, I believe that all of these people probably know something about the field already. They're probably working in the academic world of ESL teaching, So they have some prior knowledge of this topic. Well, how did I know that? What did I base those assumptions on? Well, in the very beginning of the article, I noticed that there was a lack of definitions. None of those key terms were defined. They didn't tell me what academic writing was. They didn't explain textual plagiarism. The author's assuming that I, as the reader, already know those things. And then we'll see later that some use of hedging or qualifying words, qualifications, suggested to me that the authors believed that the audience is not really happy with the state of plagiarism policy. That perhaps currently what's going on in the university system about plagiarism is not necessarily what the author thinks should be happening. So, there's other reasons why you can base, there's other examples that you can base your assumptions off of, but we're going to look at just those two for now. So, definitions. As I said in the introduction of my article, it was the lack of definitions, or the fact that there really were no definitions, that made me decide who my audience was. So then I wanted to look at, well, what definitions are provided, and maybe that will even give me more information about audience. So I went to the next section of my article, which was titled Theoretical Framework. So what theories are the researchers basing their information off of? And the first definition that I came to was a definition of academic writing. Okay, so academic writing as a situated activity. Okay. Next definition I came to was also of academic writing. So they further defined it as a social practice. And then they even define it again, academic writing as a complex of literacy practices. And then finally they defined it one more time with a more general, all writing is discursive. So that gives me information right there. 3 definitions right in the beginning, all of academic writing. Well, it makes sense because that's what this article is about. It's about plagiarism in academic writing. But now I think that the authors must really want everyone reading the article to have the same understanding of what academic writing is. I think if you asked Sharon and other people in the field, in this field, there would be maybe 20 different definitions of academic writing, what it really is. So these authors decided that they wanted all of their readers to have the same understanding, to have a mutual understanding of what academic writing is. So I looked at what structures were used. Academic writing as a situated activity, academic writing as social practice. And I know in your books, on page 55 and 56, there were elements of formal sentence definitions. And I know you all have done some work on this, but I thought it was great that right at the very bottom of page 55, the last sentence, talks about the category word in a formal sentence definition. The category word is going to be a more general word than the key term. And all of these definitions fit that example. So academic writing as a situated activity. So activity is going to be our category word. It's a more general word than academic writing. But academic writing is an activity. Academic writing as social practice, so as a practice. And in the book, the class words were technique, method, process, system. So kind of general categorical words that can apply to a lot of different fields. So why were these definitions included or not included? Well, as I mentioned earlier, definitions were not included initially because there was some understanding that readers knew. But then these definitions were included so that everyone had a shared understanding of the key topic of the article, academic writing. So then let's look at hedging, and then I'm going to have you all look at your articles, okay? So for hedging, I went back to the introduction. I decided to focus on the introduction and the theoretical framework, kind of the beginning sections of my article. There is concern. Okay? So there's a general concern. They didn't write, there's no doubt. They wrote that there's a concern. More than 400. They didn't write less than 400 or only 400. They wanted to stress that there's more than 400. There's a lot. Then they wrote the underlying assumption, not the absolute fact, but an underlying assumption. So there are other assumptions, there are other beliefs about this topic. So the underlying assumption. And then they wrote some studies, so not all studies, only some studies. And then others have, which was referring to studies, so other studies have, so not every study has, right? Does this all look familiar from the hedging work you've done? Right, you're qualifying your writing so that you're not making a too strong of a statement. You're not making a bold statement like every study believes this, but some studies, many studies, there's a concern. There's some reason to do the further research that we did. Okay? So, back to the activity that you all have the handout for. So you're going to use your article, and you're going to follow the steps on the handout, analyzing the different items. I would suggest approaching it in a similar way that I did, where you focus on one or two sections. I think if you try to look at the whole article, it can be a little overwhelming. So you may just want to start with the introduction or the beginning part, and then go from there. See if you're finding the same trends in the next section, or see if there's a difference. Then at the conclusion of the activity, you're going to email Sharon just a brief, informal summary of one or two of your observations.
Does it seem reasonable to you that they would hedge in that place?
And so if it's still an audience of others in the field. And do you think that those are brief definitions? Are they assuming that there's no meaning of those? It looks like they're doing an honest.
Yeah, so if you have your one or two observations, you can send them in the email, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the plan for today.